Hope you were able to enjoy your 30-minute break. Could I have a show of raising hands for those that are here?
Committee Member Peck, are you here? I see you unmuted yourself, so I see that you're here.
We have a quorum, so let us begin where we left off, but let me give you an idea of where I think we need to go. I'm concerned that as the afternoon goes later, we might lose quorum, and to ensure that we have an opportunity for the members of the public who would like to speak on items not on the agenda. As soon as we finish with agenda item 10A, we will move to items not on the agenda, and then we will return to finish item B and C for agenda item 10. So with that, we've had good conversations both from the public and some from the committee. If the committee members who do not wish to speak agenda item A lower their hand, and those that do leave that hand up. So agenda item A is the topic of discussion. Would any committee members like to either have further discussion or make a motion?
Committee Member Williams, I see that your hand is still raised. Are you wishing to make a comment?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Committee Member Nevdahl, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
This is Committee Member Nevedal, and for process clarification, if a motion is not made on this item, can we come back to it, time willing, before we end agenda item 10, or would we be closing the possibility to move something on item 10A?
I believe I can open the floor for a motion on agenda item A. You would need to just let me know. Otherwise, I probably won't go back and reopen it unless I have some interest from a committee member to make such a motion.
Okay. In the sake of time, I do think that this is a real issue for the industry, and so I am still a little bit confused, so I don't want to necessarily belabor the topic and then not get anywhere. Is there, because we might lose a quorum, is there an opportunity to bring this back in September? I'm concerned about the statutory kind of hiccups or pieces that Tamara mentioned, and I'm just not sure how to navigate them. But I also think during consolidation, this is a real issue that, cultivators and processors can't store bulk product for any given time at a distributor's, and that we can't have these distributors using storage-only facilities as hubs. And so I could make a motion that's broad and somewhat vague. I just don't know if that's beneficial. But I do want to see this issue addressed if there's a way to do it. So I'm just not sure how to proceed.
I understand your concerns. So here's what I can tell you, that yes, if we end the day and we believe it's something that we would like to see on the return to the next agenda, we could do that. Again, I would hope that by then we have an idea of what we might want to do. Two, you could make a broad recommendation, which could give guidance to the licensing agencies as they contemplate moving forward with draft regs where that it's serious. And you could make a comment to the effect of if the recommendation isn't currently available under the current, because of statutory restraints, if there's ability to do legislative correction, provided it isn't impacted by Proposition 64 and having to go back to the will of the voters, we could do something like that as well. That way would kind of demonstrate the urgency.
Okay.
Committee Member Boboian, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, so from my understanding, the biggest issue is a licensed distributor being allowed to pick up product from a storage facility without having to send the product back to a producer. And since track and trace already accounts for the product being at the storage only facility, and since licensed storage is already a commercial cannabis activity, I don't see why it has to go back to the producer for distributors to pick it up. So I would make a motion to allow for the distributor to pick up product from a licensed storage facility and continue up the supply chain without having to send the product back to producer.
Committee Member Boboian, can I ask you to repeat your motion one more time, just a little bit slower so we can make sure we record it correctly?
Sure thing. So the motion is to allow for a licensed distributor to pick up product from a storage facility without having to send the product back to the producer.
Thank you. Committee Member Nevdal, you had your hand raised. If you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I will second Member Boboian's motion.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevdal. Chair, we have a motion and a second.
Very good. Are there any other committee members that wish to speak? Hearing none, let's open the motion up to public comment.
Hey, before you do that, this is Tamara Colson. Let me just clarify one thing. So with this moving product from storage without going back to the original licensee's premises, I think it's not always that the product would have to go back to the producer. Sometimes it would go back to another distributor or something to that effect, or to a retailer if it's their product and they're moving it elsewhere. So I just wanted to clarify that. I know the motion speaks to producer, but it actually comes up in contexts other than the producer and more often between distributors.
No, well
Committee Member
noted.
Nevdal,
So
you have
to
your hand
clarify,
raised. If you'd like to comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Committee Member Nevdal. So it might be more accurate to say that it should not have to go back down the supply chain to another licensee. It can continue to move forward. And I see Avis has his hand raised, so I will defer to Member Boboian.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevdal. Committee Member Boboian, go ahead and unmute yourself.
yes, so the motion, if I need to amend it, would read, allow for a licensed distributor to pick up product from a storage only facility and continue it up the supply chain without having to revert back to original license holder or producer.
Was the and or producers? I'm sorry, this is court reporter.
Would it be more simple and all encompassing if I just said that the motion would be for the licensed distributor to be allowed to pick up the product from a storage-only facility and continue it up the supply chain.
I think that's a clear motion. Do I have our second? Was she accept the amendment?
This is Member Nevedal, and I do accept the friendly amendment. Thank you.
So let's try this again. We've had comment from the committee. I'd like to open that motion up to public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I am opening the Q&A feature. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Type that you would like to make a public comment and send to all panelists. As a reminder, there is a court reporter that is transcribing everything being said, so please speak loudly and clearly for her understanding. You will be given 90 seconds with a 30-second warning. I will now pause a moment to allow individuals a moment to access this feature. We do have an individual identified as Michael Wheeler. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon, committee members. Michael Wheeler with Slocana. I want to thank committee members Bouboulian and Nevedal. This motion makes perfect sense and speaks exactly to the issue at hand. I strongly support it. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Lindsay Robinson. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. This is Lindsay Robinson, California Cannabis Industry Association, in strong support of the motion. Thank you.
Next public comment comes from Paul Hansberry. Your microphone is unmuted.
Susan's.
Good afternoon. Yes, the storage only issue seems to be just speaking to distributors. I was under the impression that we were talking about possibly creating a new license for people that would just have a storage only facility. And then that would be able to be moved forward. It would be an adjunct to the premises, and not necessarily a distributor, a full distributor. So if I'm mistaken about that, then I stand corrected. I'd like some clarification on that if it's at all possible. Thank you.
Our next public. This is the moderator. Did somebody start speaking? Yeah. All right. Our next public comment comes from a Holly Carter. Your microphone is unmuted.
I'm sorry, I started early. Hello, my name is Holly Carter. I live in Humboldt County and see this being an issue that could affect supply chain, and thank the committee for addressing it and offering this recommendation to the state regulators to be able to work in more flexibility for types of supply chain cohesion. Thank you. Yeah, it didn't work, did it?
Is there any way that you can slightly turn your volume down?
Oh, well, I'm done.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Lauren Frazier. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, my public comment is on behalf of the Cannabis Distribution Association. I'd like to thank the committee members for raising this and note that we are in strong support of the motion. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Raquel. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, I wanted to thank the whole board, but I am definitely in agreement with this motion. I believe that it's more secure, it's safe, it helps keeps costs low, and the ability to allow distributors to pick up product and continue it up the supply chain is super simple and much easier. I definitely support it. Thanks.
We have received no requests for additional comments. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please, moderator.
This feature is now closed.
So we've had conversation, public comment twice, and a motion. So I'd ask that we read back the motion and take a vote, please.
So the motion is the CAC recommends to allow for a licensed distributor to pick up product from a storage-only facility and continue it up the supply chain. And with that, I will start with the vote. Bobulian.
Aye.
Thank you, Sir Matt.
Aye.
Thank you, Clifford.
Aye.
Thank you, Farrow.
Aye.
Thank you, Heidelback.
Aye.
Thank you, Harada.
Aye.
Thank you, Huffman. Committee Member Huffman, are you there? Okay, we'll move on to Committee Member Lynch.
Aye.
Committee Member Nevdahl.
Aye.
Committee Member Peck. Committee Member Peck, I cannot hear you. Can you increase your volume?
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Stevenson.
Aye.
Committee Member Williams.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I could not understand you, Committee Member Williams. Can you say it one time?
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Wu.
Yes.
Committee Member Yu.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, thank you for the work on that. As I said before, we will hold on item B and C and move to agenda item number 11, public comments not on the agenda.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I have opened the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type "I would like to make a public comment." Again, this is for agenda item 11, public comments not on the agenda. You will be given 90 seconds with a 30-second warning. Remember to please speak clearly and loud. Thank you.
And this is the co-moderator, just to remind the public that public comment on items not on the agenda, the committee may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting.
Our first public comment comes from a Dylan Burns. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, committee. Thank you for taking the time today. My name is Dylan Burns with Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs down in San Diego. One issue I'd like to address, and I'd really like the committee to consider putting on the agenda for the next meeting, is the lack of Category 1 action levels for pesticides. Consider a situation where a lab has spent, tried to save some money and bought 20-year-old instrumentation. They can do all the analysis required by the state. Lab B, rather, spared no expense in buying the latest and greatest instrumentation. So the Lab B has a significantly lower detection limit than Lab A that has tried to save money on instrumentation. With the action level being detect, non-detect, this pushes products that may contain low-level Category 1 pesticides to the less capable lab. I know that this was not the intention when the regulation was written, but it's a glaring foresight that in the regulation that's created a lot of chaos. I know amongst other labs and with a lot of the industry in general, they don't know where to get a good answer or the right answer. And furthermore, with the implementation of the OCal program, I'm also concerned about the lack of action levels with the expanded list of pesticides that's being proposed. I urge you guys to establish action levels, even if it's really low.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Ross Gordon. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, everyone. Ross Gordon on behalf of Humboldt County Growers Alliance. Would like to make two suggestions for future agendas. One is to discuss track and trace regulations. This is probably the biggest day-to-day barrier that folks are facing. I think we haven't really had a chance to have a collective discussion about track and trace regulations since the system really went into effect for a lot of licensees about a year ago. There are a lot of issues which cause problems both in terms of waste and cost and inefficiency. And I know one big priority of this committee has been to make sure the legal cannabis industry is competitive with the illicit market. And I think track and trace is an enormous area where we have an ability to make regulatory improvements that are going to make things a lot easier on licensees who are trying to do the right thing. The other possibility for a future agenda I just wanted to put forward is some consideration of compositing regulations for testing. This is a little bit technical and won't go into it too much now. It is in our written
30
comments.
seconds.
But in short, this is a testing system that really streamlines and expedites testing specifically for smaller farms. And in Humboldt County right now, we're looking at opening up very cottage cultivation for folks under 2,000 square feet. And I think compositing regulations would be a great way to really streamline the process, especially for those legacy, really the smallest farmers, and make sure that they're able to reduce their costs.
Our next public comment comes from Mario Fernandez. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. My name is Mario Fernandez, and I'm here from the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 5. I would like to thank the Bureau of Cannabis Control for their effort in working with us through our public records request regarding licensure and labor peace agreements. Through this and other record requests with the CDFA and CDPH, we've been able to determine a preponderance of cannabis licenses remain without a proper labor peace agreement or an attestation stating their intention to enter into such an agreement at a later date. For reference, I would ask that you look at Assembly Bill 1298, which codified this, particularly Section 5, subsection A, items 1 and 2. And while I understand a portion of this problem may be attributed to a lack of education or procedural misunderstanding, the vast majority of this is easily understood as a lack of overall enforcement. The BCC does pride itself on these big busts of unlicensed businesses and products, and while the BCC would continue to assert the dominance of legal and well-regulated industry, it doesn't do so in the interest of the workforce. So rather than have the BCC take on the onerous task of reviewing each file or asking unions to blindly file complaints for businesses, the BCC could send license holders a notice to comply or risk losing their license, such as they did at the start of this year. Those already on file will have complied, and those with will have one last opportunity. As such, those who do not respond would be out of compliance, and the BCC could suspend those. Of all the paperwork involved in obtaining a cannabis license,
Our next public comment comes from Lauren Frazier. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you, Lauren Frazier with the Cannabis Distribution Association. I have several items not on the agenda. One is around mitigating distributors' collection risk. There's a huge problem with the inability to collect funds from retailers by distributors. And theoretically from brands to distributors as well, so not to limit distributors. But essentially what we're looking for is the requirement for retailers and essentially distributors as well to hold surety bonds, that those bonds can be called upon when the purchasing party defaults on their required payment, and potential suspension of licenses if those payments are not made, including tax payments that are due to be collected. Another item is in regards to Section 5052.1 on current regulations, which dictates that receivers shall reject cannabis goods that differ from those listed on the sales or invoice. So we'd like to seek an amendment so that minor corrections can be made to transfer manifests that don't result in the entire shipment being rejected. Another item is around licensing fees. We suggest that the Bureau implement a mechanism that allows licensees to recoup overpayments of licensing fees, as well as pay the difference in the event to avoid penalties of overpayment. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Lindsay Robinson. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you so much, Lindsay Robinson from CCIA. I have a few items that we would love to add to future agendas. The first one is hemp and hemp regulations and the rulemaking process around that, duplicative licensing issues, extension of the provisional license, delaying the appellation of origin program, and expanding the license types that can process cannabis. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Khalil Ferguson. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. My name is Khalil Ferguson. I'm the Economic Development Chair for the United Core Alliance here in Sacramento. I'd like to start by sending my condolences to the family of James Sweeney. I worked with James Sweeney in Sacramento on some social justice issues, and he was very influential in helping us establish a social equity program here in Sacramento. And to that point, I would love to usher the fact that we need to continue to talk about social equity in these spaces and have proponents of social equity on the subcommittees and then the committees for on the BCC. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Wayne Laughter. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you very much, Chair Farrow, moderators, and committee members for your service to this effort. I would ask that you recommend that the opportunity to secure provisional licenses be extended for at least 2 more years due to CEQA and local ordinance kind of complications. That I would also ask that the appellations of origin program be put off for another year. With the COVID virus, it's really hard to build community involvement in local areas, which is a core concept of the appellations program. That feels really important as a program for the long-term viability of the cannabis industry, that it would be done right the first time instead of done by a certain schedule. The last point that I wanted to make is that
30 seconds.
Thank you. I'll stop there. This again is Wade Laughter with House of Harlequin, and I thank you for all your efforts on the part of the cannabis industry. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Zinzi Tam. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Members of the Cannabis Advisory Committee, my name is Zinzi Tan, making this public comment on behalf of the Joint Powers Authority Zero Waste Sonoma. In addition to consolidation, we ask that waste regulations be clarified so that they are consistent with state laws AB 1826 and SB 1383, which prohibit landfill disposal of organic material. In an effort to minimize cannabis waste sent to landfill, compostable cannabis wastes such as plant trimmings and edibles should have packaging removed and made unrecognizable and unusable by mixing with compostable substrates such as hay, sawdust, and shredded paper. Contamination of compostable cannabis waste with non-compostable or hazardous materials such as bleach, paint, or plaster should be discouraged. Thank you for your consideration.
Our next public comment is from Michael Wheeler. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon, committee members. Michael Wheeler with Flocana. Number one, I wanted to second Khalil Ferguson's comments that social equity ought to be a future topic with this committee. And then secondly, I wanted to expand upon the recommendation made by Wade Laughter and Lindsay Robinson that the provisional license sunset be an item for a future meeting as well. 85% of current cultivation licensees hold a provisional license, and there is no clear path to get them into annual licenses. We know that this provisional license sunsets at the end of 2021, and we know that unless extended, we will face a large extinction event at that time. These large extinction events disproportionately affect small and minority-owned businesses that do not have access to the capital or the necessary expertise to bridge the challenges that site-specific CEQA requires. We're not asking for an indefinite extension. or any sort of suspension of California's strong environmental standards, but we do need an extension for everyone to come into compliance. Thank you.
Our next public commenter is Holly Carter. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, this is Holly Carter. I apologize for my poor technology connection earlier, and thank you for making space for our comments. I have a few things that I'd like to echo and some to add. I would like to echo what Mr. Ross Gordon was saying about adding track and trace regulations and considerations to an upcoming meeting. The onerous nature of the upkeep and record keeping requirements, especially on the smaller farmers, the smaller the farmer, the more difficult it is to keep up with. And when you look at the enforcement actions possible on the record keeping requirements, have a higher penalty, and they're more difficult to keep up with. So I think that that is a space that we should certainly look at, especially as the nature of cannabis changes in the overall scheme of the world as it becomes more normalized. I also would like to echo what the caller was saying about waste, but also looking for opportunities to reintegrate what we call waste right now, which is anything that's unsellable, which has many wonderful opportunities later for use, like hempcrete and other options.
It appears we lost audio connection. Our next public comment comes from Paul Hansberry. Your microphone is unmuted.
Yes, good afternoon. A few things. First of all, it was brought up in September that they would perhaps discuss tasking CDPH with putting together a committee for research for this has already been dictated and funded through Prop 64 through the UC system. Perhaps instead of duplicative measures, we would want to make the results of the research that's being conducted by the UC system a bit more accessible. Number two, I know that Fish and Wildlife and the water boards have their own cannabis division. I'm very curious as to why they're not included in this consolidation. They seem to be outliers, and there's a lot of conflicting regulations. And if they were part of the team, they should be included with consolidation. And so I'll just stop there. Oh, the provisional license extension is really important for all of us small farmers, especially. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Joanna Cedar. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. Joanna Cedar with the Cedar Group and Sonoma County Growers Alliance. I concur with Mr. Gordon about agendizing the following two topics, the functionality of the track and trace system and compositing testing requirements. And I agree with Ms. Robinson, Mr. Laughter, and Mr. Wheeler, and others about the provisional license program being extended. The secret requirements are not able to be met at the local level at this time, and it will be very difficult for counties to be able to process those applications in order to pass them along to the state for annual licensing. I'd also like to agree with Ms. Robinson about agendizing a discussion about hemp and hemp regulation and how it relates to cannabis regulation. Thank you very much.
Our next public comment comes from Brandon Bolton. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you all for your time today. I'm Brandon Bolton, president of the United Core Alliance. I wanted to agree with what Khalil and Mr. Wheeler said about, we need more social equity representation on the CAC completely. Taking a moment to remember the late, great James Sweeney and everything that he has worked on thus far for us social equity members would not be on this call if it was not for that man, teaching me the processes of government and actually, inspiring me and motivating me to motivate those, not just here in Sacramento, but beyond in other social equity environments as well. So I'd like to see more representation for us on that committee, more, agendas, more items on this agenda, focused towards those. And I'd like to see, some of the members on the call that are directors from these large associations, when talking about the temporary license, I'd like to see them start advocating a lot more for social equity, reaching out to social equity organizations and building coalition, around the social equity environment and non-social equity environment.
30 seconds.
And I would also, just closing off, I would like to start the conversation for social equity and hemp. I know that we try to distinguish the two by definition. Technically, industrial hemp, come on, it's the same species of plant. It's the same. If we have social equity in cannabis, we should have social equity in hemp. That is a beast of an industry. We would like to be able to make cement. We would like to make textiles. We would like to be a part of that and be incentivized and have benefits to do so. Thank you all for your time.
Our next public comment comes from Mario Martin. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you very much. My name is Mario Martin. On behalf of the United Core Alliance and developer of the curricula for the core program on behalf of the Greater Sacramento Urban League. The curricula is a seed-to-shelf 18-week comprehensive and practical program that we are always looking to improve our educational and equitable baseline. For example, we are developing ancillary business scope for education by working with UCs and industry to build strength and equity. Our premise here today is to share our strength and get further representation for equity members on the Community Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Antoinette Duncan. Your microphone is unmuted. Antoinette, you do not need to remute your microphone. I am manually doing it.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Antoinette Duncan with Cannabis, and I wanted to bring up a few recommendations related to Chapter 6, testing laboratories. The first one was in the first public comment related to Category 1 pesticides. I definitely believe that there should be an action limit set so that everyone has to meet the same action limits. In addition, I'd like to recommend 2 different requirements from Oregon, from the state of Oregon, related to qualifiers for CCB failures. I recommend that you consider the allowable qualifiers for high and low bias when it comes to CCB failures in the NELAC Institute standard. And also for proficiency testing, allow the last 2 out of 3 to be successful instead of requiring labs to stop reporting as a result of a single analyte being out of
30 seconds.
Out of acceptance. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Excuse me, this is a reporter. I did not get who you represent. I'm sorry.
Cannasafe, CANNASAFE.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Edgar C. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, my name is Edgar Cruz from the Long Beach Cannabis Commerce Council, a social equity advocacy group based in Long Beach. I am also a social cannabis equity recipient within the jurisdiction of Long Beach as well. I would like to thank the panel for taking my time today. My organization is working with local policymakers in Long Beach to develop effective cannabis equity ordinances that benefit communities most affected by the war on drugs here in Long Beach. We are also building coalition with groups such as the United Core Alliance program and also a stakeholder with the Cannabis Equity of GoBiz. What our non-profit establishment would like to see is more representation with cannabis equity members on the Cannabis Advisory Committee, as well as current Cannabis Advisory Committee focusing more on upholding and improving equity ordinances, and would like to make a recommendation, the Cannabis Advisory Committee, to make sure counties as well as cities oblige to equity ordinances given by the state, as well as expand cannabis ownership opportunities to equity applicants. As data shows throughout the nation, social cannabis equity is failing dramatically, while monopolies continue to unfold within the industry.
20
With Long Beach,
seconds.
with Long Beach at a 2% success rate for cannabis equity, approval paperwork and grants are proven useless in attempting to create a legal business. We urge the committee on focusing more on equity as we still continue to struggle to build legal cannabis businesses within our state. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to working with all you guys for a more equitable.
Our next public comment comes from Peter H. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for allowing us to comment. I have 6 different points I would like to be considered for future discussions, mostly relating to manufacturing. I'd like to see a pathway for manufacturers to be able to do R&D testing samples of their own products, similar to as chefs or candy makers would make, and be able to sample their products. There should be a way that these artisans in this industry should be able to sample their products legally, and a pathway to do so in metric. Number 2, the remediation process for remediating material should be revamped. There's manufacturers that do processes over and over, significantly proved to be effective. There's no reason that each time a remediation is done, that same process should be approved over and over, because that causes delay in the supply chain. And there's been times that it's been up to 2 to 3 weeks where you don't get a response back on your remediation plan, which delays everything. Number 3, there should be a way for reclaimed cannabinoids to be added to metric, such as when glassware is cleaned. A lot of times this is cleaned with a solvent. The solvent is then distilled, and the cannabinoids are removed from the solvents. There's no way to add that to metric. So that would be a great pathway to add and look into. There also is conflicts with the Weighmaster certificates based on the Weighmaster regulations and laws, and within the cannabis regulations. I propose that that's looked into and clarified and more in depth for cannabis licensees. And also allowing distributors to place QR codes related to lab testing on packaging. Currently, they're only allowed to add cannabinoids and terpene lab test results onto the packaging, but it does exclude QR codes and.
Our next public comment comes from Ray Pers. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. I'm Ray Pers, consultant for the cannabis industry. I want to say Attorney James Sweeney was the chairman we needed for social equity. It was his vision. The $45 million equity fund was just a start investing in equity cannabis businesses. The committee awarded the funding based on city grant applications. However, the no interest loan program is not in the best interest of
I'm sorry, I cannot understand.
Mr. Pers.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can't hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Look, you didn't hear me at all. I can start back over. I'm sorry. I wasn't probably close enough to my mic.
Just take off where you left off, please.
Okay. Minority business owners have to get into debt to keep their doors open. On my 25 years, I see that.
Sorry, I can't
Mr.
hear.
Pers, Mr. Pers, you keep on trailing off and going away from your microphone, and we cannot hear you, and we need to be able to hear you for the court reporter.
I'm sorry. I'm right up on my mic. So can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. From my 25 years of business experience, I see that no interest loans are a problem. In business, you need capital, grants, not a no interest loan. It's common sense that a grant capital is better than any loan. You don't pay the capital back each month. In fact, Oakland is seeing defaults in the city loans. The idea of paying back the loan will be funds available to future equity applicants. The loan defaults will challenge that idea. Estate grants would be capital investment in minority cannabis business and not to be paid back. Finally, I know the committee.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Gabe Parton Lee. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you all for your work today. My name is Gabe Parton Lee, and I'm the General Counsel for Wild, an edibles producer. I'd like to add an action item for the next CAC meeting in September. Section 5705B and Section 26100B of the Business and Professions Code provides that quality assurance test sampling must be taken from batches in their, quote, final form. I would like to recommend that there be a definition added to the regulations to define final form to mean the product's final form prior to packaging for retail sale. For producers with large production batches, there's a significant risk of loss of resources and labor hours for packaging an entire batch of products for final sale prior to sampling by testing laboratories. Such a change of rules would require no statutory change and would only require a minor clarification in the rules. And we would ask that this be added to the next committee meeting agenda. Thank you all for your work, and I appreciate your time.
30 seconds.
That's all.
Our next public comment comes from Robert Harris. Your microphone is unmuted. Mr. Harris, your microphone is unmuted. You may need to mute your cell phone. Unmute.
Thank you so much. I need those instructions. This is Robert Harris with SEIU California. I have 3 general comments for consideration and then one just generally overall comment. One, that SEIU believes totally that there's been an inattention to equity in the whole cannabis space, and that we believe that every discussion and every regulation that's addressed should keep equity in mind as the conversation proceeds. 2, we totally agree with the person from UFCW Local 5 that there needs to be better care and attention paid to labor peace agreements, and that no one should have a license unless they comply with the law. I mean, that's why the law is the law. 2, we agree that there should be further discussion and deeper discussion about track and trace. We think there are some improvements that need to be made in that system and the
30
implementation
seconds.
thereof. Finally, just an overall comment that the biggest problem right now in the industry is a lack of retail space. And although that's not the purview of this committee, it's important that we all keep that in mind and look for creative ways to create more opportunity to sell cannabis at the retail level. Thank you much.
Our next public comment comes from Wesley Hine. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, this is Wesley Hine with Mammoth Distribution. And it's been a long day, and you certainly deserve to hear something non-controversial. Here it is. I am calling about printed COAs, that is, test results, requiring distributors to print and distribute physical COAs for every batch, with every order, on every SKU, every time, is bad for the environment. It's an enormous waste of paper. It's bad for operators. It's very expensive. And it's bad for consumer and patient health. Requiring multiple people to handle the same piece of paper during a pandemic is a very questionable requirement. We live in an electronic age. We even moved this meeting online. Let's do the same with COAs. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Raquel. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, my name is Raquel Brown. I'm with High Empress. I'm also a participant of the Social Equity Program here in the city of Sacramento. I would like to add to the future agenda items around social equity and how the committee plans on supporting and promoting women of color in the industry. I also want to recommend the committee with maybe setting up a subcommittee for social equity to represent core participants and social equity participants. I would also like to consider the committee to consider expanding grant opportunities for social equity and core graduates. I would like to also suggest the committee consider or think about another pathway to build incubator projects that would allow equity participants to have an opportunity to participate in, subsidy-based rental space and to expand their licenses. So if you guys could consider that, that would be awesome. I also want to also send out my condolences to James Sweeney and his family. But I would
30
like to,
seconds.
but I would like to continue to make sure that the committee is well aware that we need to continue the vision and to fight for social equity to, you know, continue his legacy. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Bohemi Nellis. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, can you all hear me?
We can.
Hi, this is Bo. I'm a buyer, inventory manager, and compliance officer at HPC in Port Hueneme. That's HUENEME. And I agree with a lot of the points here, such as being able to make minor corrections on manifests and invoices, and the onerous regulations regarding UIDs and how we have to reprocess, I should say, every product at the retail level and monitor the sales of increasing items being processed daily through the UID 6 months after the sale without any good reporting. I also would like to have COAs moved electronically. Maybe there's some way to integrate that with Metric. I feel like it should be attached to the UID in some way. I'd also like some clarification regarding the reporting of inventory discrepancies, major inventory discrepancies, for those who are reporting daily and more in time. And then I'd also like, first off, just more social equity focus, of course. And then cannabis accessories having to be purchased is really negating a means of better educating the public. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Mitchell Colbert. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, this is Mitchell Colbert, Full Spectrum Strategy. I just want to echo some of the environmental points brought up by many other speakers. So I'm a grassroots lobbyist specifically focused on the issue of vape pen recycling, worked in California and Colorado on this issue. Spoke at last October's Cannabis Advisory Committee on this issue. I'm just going to echo the words of someone on that committee. Quote, the industry needs as much clarification as they can get around what is legal, around what is not legal. While some operators, like Dosist and the numerous dispensaries they partner with, have a fully functional dispensary recycling program, several other operators I've spoken to feel that the BCC and CDPH regulations do not presently allow for vape recycling. As the three agencies work to consolidate, they should be mindful of their waste regulations. One specific problem is that while BCC statutory section 5054, destruction of cannabis goods prior to disposal, subsection D, only requires vape pens to be unusable, CDPH statutory section 40290, waste management, subsection C, requires devices to be unrecognizable as well. Since they have to be unrecognizable, that greatly complicates their recycling. One operator I spoke to said that since state's regulations are so strict, they have to smash their vape pens with a hammer and then send them to the landfill. As we know, e-waste shouldn't go to the landfill, especially after it's been smashed with a hammer. That's going to get lead and other things into the groundwater and soils. Please give cannabis operators clarity around the important issue of recycling. Look to the state of Colorado, which has just legalized this and is implementing those rules right now. Thank you for your time today.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Ray Pers. Your microphone is unmuted.
Yeah, Ray Pers here. I just want to finish up my statement before because I got cut off. I just want to say, finally, I know the committee did authorize no interest loans. However, in Oakland, the repayment average is $2,700 a month on a $1,000 loan, where they're then paying $30,000 a year from their businesses. I would hope the committee can review the no interest loan and encourage the city to convert those loans to capital investment grants. Thank you.
We have received no additional requests for public comment. I take that back. We've actually received no additional comments. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes.
This feature has been closed.
Yes. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that there may have been some people still in the queue, but because of time and trying to maintain quorum, we had people limited to one time at the microphone, and I think some people had already had a chance to get their minute and a half in. So sorry that we weren't able to get back to you, and we are going to move to item 10B so we can move through the process. So the item B has to deal with trade samples between licensees. The question for the advisory committee was, samples of cannabis goods must be handled in compliance with all the rules that apply to all the other cannabis goods in the system. Should the state consider specific regulatory provisions for the handling of commercial cannabis good trade samples? Current law is BPC section 26-153 prohibits licensees from giving away any amount of cannabis or cannabis products or any cannabis accessories as a part of a business promotion or other commercial activity. Due to limitations enumerated in statute, the regulations do not establish specific rules for the handling of trade samples. Accordingly, samples of cannabis goods must be handled in compliance with all of the rules that apply to all other cannabis goods in the system. G, satisfy packaging, labeling, and testing requirements, be transported by a licensed distributor in accordance with the regulations, sold to a customer via a licensed retailer, satisfy taxation requirements, etc. Notably, licensees are prohibited from consuming cannabis goods on their licensed premise. Licensees have expressed concerns regarding the inability to conduct sensory analysis to determine the quality of a cannabis good and to educate retailers on cannabis goods. Licensees indicate that trade samples are important for small and emerging licensees to enter the market and for retailers to gain a better understanding of the effects of a cannabis goods they intend to sell to customers. Consideration: create a framework that allows for trade samples and ensures that they are properly packaged, tracked, and tested prior to consumption. This could include limitations to the amount of the trade samples that are allowed from a cannabis batch, limitations to the amount which may be given to a licensee for sampling at a given time, and methodologies for classifying and providing samples. Allowing trade samples may assist small businesses gain exposure within the developing commercial cannabis market while ensuring public health and safety in the handling of trade samples of cannabis goods. So with that, I will open up the opportunity for our committee to make comments on this consideration.
Any committee members wishing to make a comment, please raise your hand, and remember that we are speaking so that a court reporter can track the meeting, so please speak clearly and slowly and try to limit any background noise you have. Committee member Boboian, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, on this one, it's a pretty big issue. Right now, there are a lot of ways that this is being circumvented anyway. You can sell the full product for a penny and all that stuff. I think if we can come up with some way of allowing the producers to allow to be able to provide samples to the retailers, it's going to go a really long way for both sides of the supply chain. Retailers don't have to blindly purchase product without understanding what they're purchasing. It could be something as simple as having the sample be labeled now for resale, sample only, which the retailer wouldn't be able to resell to a consumer. But I do think that this definitely needs to be addressed in some sort of a system of being able to provide samples to the retailer. It's pretty important.
Thank you, committee member Boboian. Are there any other committee members that wish to make a comment? If so, please raise your hand. Chair, I am not seeing any additional committee member comments. Oh, I see Boboyan has raised his hand again. Boboyan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, so without any more comments, I'd like to propose that the Bureau create regulations that would allow for samples to be provided to retailers.
That's a motion, Committee Member Boboyan.
Yes, for the life of me, I forgot the word motion.
Did we capture the motion as read?
We did, and I see that we have Committee Member Wu with his hand raised. Committee Member Wu, if you would like to speak, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I was just going to second unless Nevidal wants a second.
Please, Member Wu, it's your second.
Okay, I second the motion.
Thank you, Committee Member Wu. So just to make sure I have the motion correct, Committee Member Boboyan, if you can let me know, the motion is to recommend that the Bureau create regulations that would allow for samples to be provided to retailers. Is that correct? Committee Member Boboyan.
Sorry, I was having problems with the mute button. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
This is Chairman Farrow. Can we change it to the licensing agency instead of the Bureau? Because we don't know at the end of the day what this reg package will be calling the agency that would be over the cannabis licensing.
Whatever the appropriate agency would be that would have the oversight over this issue.
Thank you. So, moderator, can we open up public comment?
We can. At the direction of the committee, I am opening the Q&A panel. If you would like to submit a public comment, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send to all panelists. We will take comments in the order that they are received. And please remember that we do have a court reporter, so ensure that you are speaking clearly and loudly enough that she can capture what it is you're saying. You will be given 90 seconds with a 30-second warning.
And this is the BCC co-moderator. I just want to remind the public that we are taking public comment on the motion to recommend that the licensing agency create regulations that would allow for samples to be provided to retailers. Thank you.
Our first public comment comes from Ross Gordon. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ross Gordon. On behalf of Humboldt County Growers Alliance, thank you for considering this item. This is a very high priority for our independent and small farmers and manufacturers. We're supportive of the motion, supportive of trade samples, and supportive basically of the framework that's being discussed, including making sure that samples are tested by a licensed laboratory before they're able to go out. The thing that I would like to highlight, though, is really the devil is in the details on this. And specifically, I think it's really crucial to make sure that trade samples are accessible for producers, for farmers, and for manufacturers who do not have access to full distribution licenses and who don't have access to vertical integration. In Humboldt County, we have 800 state licensed cannabis farms, most of whom do not have access to full distribution. And creating regulations in such a way that they are able to transport those samples through a licensed transport vehicle directly to retail, I think is an extremely strong consideration. I appreciate Committee Member Boboyan for mentioning
30 seconds.
Samples is producer access is really essential to trade samples. I also appreciate the analysis suggesting that small and emerging businesses are really a really important constituency for trade samples. And as this has been discussed, and it's been a long discussion, we've been talking with other trade associations about it. There's been different regulatory models proposed, and I just think it's really essential that the regulatory model that goes through does give access to small producers, because those are the folks creating craft products.
Our next public comment comes from Peter H. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to make a comment that I fully support Member Baboulian's motion to approve this. I would like to make a couple suggestions for the committee. I would like to see some kind of tax allowance where these samples would not be subject to excise tax and use tax if used by the members of the dispensary. The other allowance I would like to see in this legislation is allowing sales representatives to carry their personal amounts of samples without the use of a distributor to going to retailers to show off product samples, as long as it's within the the personal allowance of carrying. I think that should be allowed as well, as long as there's some type of chain of command. So I fully support the motion. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Bohemi Nellis. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. I also strongly support the measure. I would also like to see a caveat that allows brand staff to curate their own samples without having to go through the retail level. And I would like to see allowances in excess of the legal limits. Thank you.
This is the moderator. I do want to remind members of the public that if you would like to make a public comment, please follow the instructions displayed for your reference. All other forms of requesting public comment will be dismissed. So if you are currently using the hand raise feature, please lower your hand and submit as instructed. Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Lauren Frazier. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you, Lauren Frazier with the Cannabis Distribution Association. This particular issue is one of our top priorities, so thank you for placing it on the agenda. I'd like to recommend that the motion be expanded slightly, such that samples be provided to retailers by a sales representative of the distributor. And that would be such that sales representatives would be limited to personal carry limits. This expansion of the motion would allow for or require that manual logs be kept by the licensed distributor as to which sales representatives they distributed those samples to, and the sales reps would be responsible for reporting back to which retailers they gave those samples, as these would be personal carry and would not be under a traditional manifest in a transport vehicle. Limited to carry limits, COA'd product, not taxed. And there's one other kind of characterization, which is that this would require a new metric tag be created that's called trade samples, and it would be a metric adjustment reason. So this would not require any additional development. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Paul Hansberry. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, thank you. This is Susan Tibbin from Lovingly and Legally, Paul Hansberry and Susan Tibbin. You know, it's apocryphal that a speaker yesterday spoke from a vertically integrated company operating across the state of California. And this is exactly why small entities who built this newly legalized industry must have really the only tool that helps them gain any notice at all, let alone shelf space. Trade samples are absolutely crucial. You know, prior to '64, many of us visited dispensaries. We educated owners and staff about cannabis-based medicine. An example is a non-psychoactive topical for pain relief. People are different physiologically. What works for one, maybe not so much for another person. And without staff and administrative knowledge of what producers are making, they can't properly advise patients. Certainly non-psychoactive samples should be available to patients as well. And, you know, erecting insurmountable barriers to trade samples, it just incentivizes Walmartization, it promotes uninformed advice, and it continues to shut out unique specialized cannabis-based medicine historically made in small batches by small entities. So thank you very much for seriously considering how much we need trade samples. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Lindsay Robinson. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, Lindsay Robinson from the California Cannabis Industry Association. Thank you for taking my comments. We are in support of this motion. I would like to note that CCIA did submit some written comments to the CAC on this issue, and I won't go through reading all of them, but did want to acknowledge that, and that we also look forward to working with the other associations and companies who've expressed support for trade samples. We think that there is an urgent pathway that is needed on this issue, and we are looking forward to provide comprehensive regulatory recommendations on these issues. So thank you for your attention.
Next public commenter is Craig Johnson. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you.
We can.
Craig Johnson, Alpenglow Farms, Humboldt County. And I want to say that I support the motion that Ross Gordon put forth, one of the first commenters. And I want to elaborate on a little bit on how this would function for us. We are a small cultivator, one of 800 out of Humboldt County. It is imperative that we receive trade samples back to the cultivators and the manufacturers. By only allowing distribution to have that causes a further disconnect between farm and consumer. In the day and age of farm to table, we need to support this. Our business model is set up on making vital relationships with retailers, bud tenders, and consumers. Being able to connect with those bud tenders who are telling our story is vital. Anything more than that or less than that would be detrimental to our businesses. Distribution is helpful to get our COA and to package, but we need to receive those samples back so we can tell our own story. Thank you.
Next public comment comes from Nolan Maury. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, thank you for your time. I would like to say I am in a wholeheartedly agree that trade samples is something necessary for this industry to progress. Forgive me if I got the motion incorrect, but I think there was a distinction where it said samples could only go to retailers within the motion that was stated. I think that should be corrected to go to any licensed distributor after regulatory compliance testing as well, simply because distributors have the ability to curate much of their products as well and should be able to have the ability to sample them in addition to that. But other than that, I agree with all of the previous commenters as well. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Wesley Hine. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, this is Wesley Hine with Mammoth Distribution. I'm very much in support of this important motion. Trade samples are one of the most effective educational tools, has been noted, for licensed distributors to educate licensed retailers on their licensed products. And why shouldn't a dispensary whose sole reason for existence is to sell THC have the ability to receive samples of the same? We know it's not a matter of public safety, as the samples would be tested. We know it's not economics, as operators have strong financial incentives to only give out what is necessary. It's also not taxes, as the CDTFA has clear published guidelines on how to account for samples. Let's give highly regulated, licensed operators the same ability as everyday individuals actually have under Prop 64. As noted by several of the speakers, social equity and craft operators in particular are in need of this educational tool as they lack the budgets for more expensive, less effective forms of product education. Final question. Ask yourself, why would one be worried about giving cannabis to a bud tender who, after all, is an adult who works in a cannabis dispensary? Let's follow the sensible example of Michigan and allow trade samples between licensees. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Michael Wheeler. Your microphone is unmuted.
Good afternoon, committee members. Michael Wheeler with Flowcana. In 2019, Flowcana partnered with the California Cannabis Industry Association to sponsor legislation authored by Senator Skinner. This was SB 475 to create trade samples for use by the entire cannabis industry. But for COVID, this bill would have passed in 2020. And I remind the committee that this concept has been recommended by the CAC in previous reports. So we strongly support the creation of a trade samples program that works for all licensees. But to clarify the purpose of trade samples, they are for educational purposes, sometimes to make a sale between different licensees within the supply chain, and sometimes to educate employees about the differences between products. Remember, in cannabis, we cannot pull products off of the proverbial assembly line the same way that many other industries can. Trade samples are especially important for small and emerging businesses trying to break into the market, including social equity businesses, and other states such as Michigan understand and have succeeded in creating a mechanism for trade samples within their regulated market. Our written comments submitted to the CAC include a link to Michigan's regulations for your guidance. Thank you today.
Next public comment is from Joanna Cedar. Your microphone is unmuted.
Joanna Cedar, Sonoma County Growers Alliance. I'd like to speak in support of the motion. Trade samples tell the vital story of the product. That's all. Thank you.
Next, we have somebody identified as Dew Point. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hello, Andeline Roy with Dew Point. We are an estate-owned legacy cultivation company in the Honeydew Highlands of Humboldt County with an incredible story to tell, brand traction statewide and international interest. We absolutely need to have the standard business freedom to show samples of our products and tell our story ourselves. We are the best people to tell the story throughout the supply chain. Limiting cultivators like ourselves to relying on distributors to properly showcase our products is doing the entire supply chain a disservice. Please give us the opportunity to strengthen our networks and bring in top dollar for our world-renowned products. I am in support with Ross Gordon's comment from the HCGA and all others in support of this passing. Nobody's gonna buy a car without test driving it. So small businesses need this opportunity. Thank you all for being here today.
Next public comment is from Sarah Armstrong. Your microphone is unmuted.
I am Sarah Armstrong, Director of Industry Affairs for Americans for Safe Access. I hope that the honorable body will consider the idea that samples should be made available to compassion programs all over the state. Back in the day before regulations, this was very, very common. Now with strict labeling and testing, it's safer than ever. Compassion patients cannot afford to buy. To be able to include in their packages something new and different, something that might be genuinely helpful, would be a great act of compassion, and it involves no risk. So I would ask everyone to consider letting the compassion programs that are popping up all over the state to have access to trade samples as well. Thank you.
At this time, we have no additional requests for public comment. Would you like me to close this feature?
Please.
This feature has been closed.
This is the, thank you, moderator. This is the co-moderator chair. Committee member Cermak would like to make a comment, and I'd like to call on him now. So committee member Cermak, if you would still like to provide your comment on this agenda or on this motion, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I've, for some reason, lost access to my raise my hand. All I see is the agenda in front of me and not the participants or anything. So my wife is out of the house and I'm not able to get any help here. So thank you. I only have a question, and my understanding is that free samples are not to be given to customers. And I'm wanting to just verify whether or not I'm right in that, and whether or not there's anything in this motion that's been put forward by William that safeguards against these samples being distributed to customers.
Thank you, Committee Member Cermak. Committee Member Wu, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I just actually, a couple of the commenters hit on the technical point, which I didn't think about, but Baboulian's proposal at the end says to retailers. And now I was thinking, do we want to broaden that to all licensee types? Because there could be potential situations where you're not just trying to get samples to a retailer, but to a distributor to have them consider taking on your product. I mean, I think there could be some other situations where it should not be necessarily just to the retailer, but I wanted to see if, what was Avis's intent with retailer there. Was that intentional, or was that just generic language? Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Babou. Oh, I'm sorry. Is somebody unmuted?
No, that was me. I'm sorry. Jumped the gun.
Okay, go ahead, Committee Member Baboulian. I was calling on you.
Yes, with respect to Dr. Cermak's question, yes, this was intended to be not for the public. This is for retailers. As a follow-up to Mr. Wu's question, I didn't really consider if other licensed sectors would even have a need for a sample. If you're a grower, the only people you're really providing a sample to of your final finished product is either the retailer or the distributor. And at some point, it's coming from the distributor anyway, so that's why I left it at retailer and didn't expand on it. There is something I want to touch on throughout the public comments. The general theme that kept coming up was distributors being the only arm that would be allowed to provide the sample. The problem that creates is it's too much dependency on the distributor. One of the reasons for samples is to get more sales and shelf space for the manufacturers and the growers. The distributor already has the account. They already have access to the dispensaries. So the need for the sample is a lot greater for the other sectors than it is for the distributors. If samples were limited to the distributor, it would benefit the distribution tier, but does nothing for the actual grower and the manufacturer, who needs this as a tool to expand their business without that reliance on the distributor. Now, at some point, there's going to be a public comment period when the new draft regulations come out, and I think the issue of who gets to do what with the samples would be better addressed at that point. So right now, I would just limit the motion to the way it's stated.
Thank you, Committee Member Baboulian. Are there any other committee members that wish to provide additional comment? Chair, I do not see any other committee members raising their hands for additional comments.
Co-moderator, this is the moderator. Did you want to check with Dr. Cermak as he was unable to find his hand raised?
Yes, if you can unmute him, please, I will ask him.
He is unmuted.
Mr. Cermak, did you have any additional comments that you would like to provide on this motion?
Not at all. I got the answer I needed. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. All right, Chair, I do not see any other committee members' hand raised.
So I would like to open this up to a vote. I would like to thank Committee Member Baboulian for acknowledging for the public that the comments they made can be readdressed when we go to draft regulations. And I think some of those comments would be good to bring up during draft regulations. So thank you. So can we have a vote?
Yes, so I will read the motion one more time. The motion is to recommend that the licensing agency create regulations that would allow for samples to be provided to retailers. And with that, I will go to the vote, starting with Baboulian.
Aye.
Thank you, Cermak.
Aye.
Thank you, Clifford.
Aye.
Thank you, Farrow.
Aye.
Thank you, Heidelbach.
Aye.
Thank you, Harada.
Aye.
Thank you, Huffman. Thank you, Nevdal.
Aye.
Thank you, Peck. Peck, I see that you are unmuted, but I cannot hear you.
Aye.
Thank you. Stevenson.
Aye.
Thank you. Williams.
Aye.
Thank you, Wu.
Aye.
Thank you, and you.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Very good. Let's move into item C of agenda item 10. And that would be required use of fully enclosed box, container, or cage when transporting cannabis goods. The question for the advisory committee is as follows. Is the current requirement that cannabis goods be within a fully enclosed box, container, or cage in the vehicle during transport still necessary to ensure public health and safety? Current law, California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 5311, Subdivision F, requires that licensed distributors shall ensure that the cannabis goods they are transporting are locked in a fully enclosed box, container, or cage that is secured to the inside of the vehicle or trailer. No portion of the enclosed box, container, or cage shall be comprised of any part of the body of the vehicle or trailer. In the initial statement of reason and the final statement of reasons for the regulation, it was recognized that the licensing authorities are statutorily mandated to hold the protection of the public as the highest priority by requiring licensees to securely lock the product in a box within the interior of the vehicle. The regulation sought to reduce the risk of theft or robbery, which exposes the general public to harm or danger. Licensees have expressed concern related to the cost of installing separate and distinct cages and suggest that such requirements do not enhance the safety of the driver or the security of the products. Consideration: allow a portion of the enclosed box, container, or cage to be comprised, thank you, because we don't want to be compromised in any way, of a portion of the vehicle or trailer. This requirement would continue to ensure the security of cannabis goods that are being transported, and thus public health and safety, while minimizing installation costs for the Bureau distributor licensees. So I shall open this up to our committee for comments.
Committee Member Nevdal, I see that your hand is raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself to provide comment.
Hello, this is Committee Member Nevadal. I do want to also just point out that we have two types of distributors out there. We also have self-transport or transport-only distributors. A lot of those licensees are utilizing that self-transport license to manage, let's say, getting their product from the farm to a distributor that might not be able to make it up their driveway. Also, if they have multiple licenses on one parcel, they need to have a self-transport to move the product from parcel to parcel. So it might make sense to consider tiering these type of security features. Arguably, people are using wheelbarrows and they aren't going to put a locked cage inside of their wheelbarrow if they're moving plants from, say, their nursery area over to one of their cultivation licenses. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to reduce the onerous nature of the cage inside of a fully enclosed cage that can't be any portion of the vehicle's body. But I would further suggest that we consider tiering or making a recommendation to tier it so that this is not a requirement for the self-transport only license holders.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevdal. Are there any other committee members that wish to make a comment? Chair, I am not seeing any, oh, let me check in with Dr. Cermak. Moderator, if you can unmute Dr. Cermak. Dr. Cermak, did you have any comments on this agenda item?
Just seems like this is an area for some common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Cermak. Are there any other members wishing to make a comment on this agenda item? Chair, I do not see any committee member hand raised.
Or I would say any committee members that want to make a motion, but if we don't have a motion at this time.
I do see Committee Member Nevedal has raised her hand again, so I'm going to call on her. Committee Member Nevedal, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Committee Member Nevedal. I'll take a crack at making a motion here so we can try to move things forward. I would definitely recommend that the requirement for the enclosed box to not contain any portion of the body of a vehicle or a trailer be stricken. And I also would recommend that self-transport only distributors be exempt from this regulatory requirement.
So Committee Member Nevedal, I'm going to read back the motion just so I can make sure we got it. So the motion is that to recommend that the requirement for the enclosed box to not contain any portion of a body of a vehicle or trailer be stricken, and recommend that self-transport only distributors be exempt from this regulatory requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Heidelbach, I see that your hand is raised. I'm calling on you. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I will second Nevedal's motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Are there any other committee members that wish to make additional comment?
I have a question, if I can ask, just for clarity. Ms. Nevedal, are you talking about when the self-distribution license is being used for moving product between a contiguous piece of real estate, not leaving the property and going onto general highways or roadways?
I'm talking about any of those situations. So the self-transport distribution license is generally used by licensees needing to transport some portion of their vehicle or some portion of their product line or crop. And restricting it to their property means they're not going to get it to the pavement at the end of the road. And I also think that there's a lot of issues with the security requirements as a whole on self-transport. So, you know, a lot of self-transport people need to use their personal vehicles, which is a huge hiccup, but not part of the agenda. And having them figure out how to weld cages and boxes into their pickup trucks, to pick up their plants from a nursery, to figure out how to move cannabis for short distances, generally not in large quantity. It's a real challenge. So my intention was not to put limitations on which self-transport was exempt from these requirements.
Thank you, Committee Member Nevedal. Chair, I see that Committee Member Wu has his hand raised, so I would like to call on him. Committee Member Wu, if you'd like to provide your comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Expanding on Chair Farrow's kind of thought there is, yeah, I'm supportive of the spirit, but wonder if you allow self-transport, you know, people aren't using it in the format that you're considering kind of short haul, but, you know, is there a possibility someone might then therefore try to exploit that interpretation and, you know, do a more traditional, you know, distribution kind of transport leg in a less secure vehicle. I just, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Committee Member Wu. Committee Member Nevdal, you were responding?
Yes, if I may, this is Committee Member Nevadal. And this is self-transport, so you don't get to make it a business where you're transporting for someone else or another entity. It's truly associated with your license as a licensee. So, you could put other security features on them, but I'm hesitant with the adding layers and layers of additional security. And these folks cannot COA, so they cannot go directly to a retailer. They would have to be taking the product to another distributor for COA. I don't see the logic or why someone would take a product under self-transport for long distances. If they want to get it into the market, they're going to probably take it to their distributor. They're more likely to be working with someone locally to get that COA accomplished. If you have friendly amendments to offer, I would entertain those. But I'll turn the floor back over.
Hi, this is Tamara Colson. I just wanted to clarify one thing from a legal perspective, and that is there are no size limits on self-transport. So a person engaging in self-transport, it could be a very large operation or they could be traveling long distances. I don't know how often that's happening, but it is not, the self-transport is not limited to only smaller operations and only people traveling short distances.
Thank you, Chief Counsel. I see Committee Member Heidelback has had her hand raised. Committee Member Heidelback, or Vice Chair Heidelback, if you would like to comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify or seek clarification from Member Nevadal that we are not talking about getting rid of a lockbox. We're just talking about expanding on someone being able to use portions of, say, a trailer or a vehicle in order to meet the requirement, correct?
Go ahead, Committee Member Nevadal.
We are not talking about getting rid of a lockbox for full distribution, but the motion as it stands would eliminate that requirement for a self-transport. That's how the motion is structured right now.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heidelback. Committee Member Boboian, I see, or Committee Member Nevadal, I'm sorry. Committee Member Boboian, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think the issue becomes, now the spirit of it is for and to benefit a lot of the growers up north where they're moving product from one area to another area and not necessarily needing a lot box and a pickup truck where they can just put it in the cart. The potential problem that I see with this is, yes, they're self-transporting. At some point it does have to go to a distributor, but there's no limitation on how far the product can travel. Theoretically, if you have two licenses, one up north, one down south, and you're also self-transporting, you're putting the product in a pickup truck open there, and theoretically you could move it down there. So I think there's got to be some sort of a carve out or limitation that addresses the need to be able to move it without the lockbox for the guys that are more aligned with the spirit of which you proposed this, versus the guys that can use it as a loophole to be able to move product freely up and down until it gets to the point of distribution. So from a lot of the comments, I think that's one of the bigger concerns on this one.
Thank you, Committee Member Boboian. Vice Chair Heidelback, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
taking into consideration some of the concerns that Baboulian and also council brought forth, would member Nevedal be open to amending the motion to allow for the portion of the enclosed box, container, or cage to be comprised of a portion of the vehicle or trailer, but finding another way to separate the transport only license type, because they do have the ability to be larger operators. I feel like this is a slippery slope. I understand moving plants, but if we're moving something that can easily be placed in a lockbox, I understand the desire for some of the operators to be able to use, for example, a box that's in the trunk of the car. But removing the requirement for transport only, I do have some concerns.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heidelbach. I'm going to call on Committee Member Nevedal first to respond to see about the friendly amendment that was suggested, and then I will come back to Committee Member Baboulian. So Committee Member Nevedal, if you would like to respond, please unmute yourself. Committee Member Nevedal, you can unmute yourself. Okay, at this time, I'll move over to Committee Member Baboulian to provide his comment. Go ahead, Committee Member Baboulian.
I have an idea. Since the initial spirit of the motion was to allow for short distance movement of products, and the examples were you can't really put a cage on a wheelbarrow, why not create the limitation being a motor vehicle, where if you require a motor vehicle to transport the product, it has to have that cage and be part of the vehicle and all that good stuff. If no one's really going to be pushing down a wheelbarrow and outside of a motor vehicle anywhere long distance, and I think that might address the issue with the guys looking to move it a short distance within their property, even if it's not contiguous, but it also safeguards the product from going on highways and longer distance. What do you think about that?
I apologize. I think this is Committee Member Nevedal, and I think I disconnected for a moment. But I think maybe at this point, it might be more effective to retract the motion and go to public comment, because we might get better suggestions from the public.
Committee Member Heidelbach, would you, or Vice Chair Heidelbach, would you support the rescinding of your second?
Absolutely, yes.
And Committee Member Williams, would you like to make a comment before we go to public comment?
Yes, actually, when I look at this, it's talking about a vehicle. And under the Marina Williams, can you hear me?
Understand you. There's some background noise that's stopping me from understanding.
How about now?
That is better.
You are clear now.
Okay. Helena Williams. When I'm looking at vehicle as it's presented, there's a definition legally as to what a vehicle is. The California Vehicle Code, Section 670, defines a vehicle is a device by which any person or property may be propelled, moved, or drawn upon a highway, excepting a device moved exclusively by human power or used exclusively upon stationary rails or tracks. So I believe the intent was, one, using the official statutory definition of a vehicle in transport on a highway. And that's what this is talking about, not a wheelbarrow on private property.
Thank you, Committee Member Williams. Is there Any other community members that wish to make a comment at this time? I see
So at
no
this
other
point-
hand raised.
I'm sorry, Kayla, could we please open this up to public comment, and hopefully we get some good comments.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the committee, I am opening the Q&A panel. If you would like to make a public comment, please follow the instructions displayed for you now by clicking on the Q&A icon and typing "I would like to make a public comment" and sending to all panelists. We will take comments in the order they are received. I will now pause a moment to allow individuals an opportunity to access this feature. Our first public comment comes from an individual identified as Holly Carter. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment today. I would like to ask council to speak on this, but my understanding is that despite the definition of vehicle in the motor vehicle section of California Code, BCC does require a vehicle to be named in a transport application, even if it's being a non-roadworthy vehicle being used as the actual vehicle of transportation. I also would like to speak a little bit to the scope. I'm hearing you guys, we talk about the wheelbarrow movement, the side-by-side movement, the off-road vehicle type of movement, but there are entire batches being moved from one part of the farm to another part of the farm that can take multiple trips in the vehicle. So it is not exclusive to small batches, but also large batches, and sometimes hand movement, and sometimes necessitating vehicle movement with the layout of the farms. That does not mean that it touches public roads. It does not mean that it needs to be enclosed, and it can include plants which are too large to fit in the lockbox, to be just quite honest. You can picture with us some of the size of the scope. I also want to speak to the fact somebody brought up whether or not owners would maybe exploit this type of allowance if they're allowed to move their own product. And I'm curious if you guys can picture with me who is more interested in the security of the product that they've worked so hard over the whole year or decades to produce. So I think that the owners of the product are most interested in their own security. And I understand that sometimes we're talking about external threats, but I also want to second what Ms. Nevedal was speaking to with the owner requirements with the vehicle ownership and motor carrier.
Our next public comment comes from an individual identified as Peter H. Your microphone is unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. 2 points to make here. Number one, it seems that there might be confusion with the transport on the same property, but between two different premises. Section 26161 N does allow for foot transfer, hand cart, forklift, or any other means that are similar, which would be outside of the requirement for the cage within the current BCC regulations. So I don't think any change would be necessary on that. The other part of the motion I would like to address is the fact that most distributors are using windowless cargo vans that really don't have any access points. The limitations within the BCC regulations allow for premise-to-premise transfer with only stopping for food, lodging, or gas. So the basis of a security breach would be very limited, and I think the addition of the language that basically makes you put a cage inside of the vehicle that's already locked is erroneous and unnecessary regulation, where I think it could be sufficed by maybe providing secondary locks on the doors or maybe just a bulkhead between the driver and the cargo. But I don't think an entire cage needs to be built within a vehicle that's already locked, as it's really not going to deter someone that's interested in getting in the vehicle from doing so. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Wade Laughter. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you very much, Chair Farrow and moderators. I would be in support of the motion as offered by Member Nevedal. I don't think it even goes far enough. And I want to step out of the legalese and just make an observation. We're not talking about transporting poisons or radioactive materials or explosives or firearms. We're talking about transporting cannabis products that are safety tested and verified as clean and safe for human use. And yes, they have value to the persons who have produced them and are hoping to be able to offer them to the consumers. This is an example to me of over-regulation, over-concern based on fear and stigma associated with prohibition. This is a healing plant. We're not talking poisons or wild animals.
30
or anything
seconds.
else. I think that so many of the regulations that we discuss in these meetings and deal with as license holders are overly burdensome and not well informed on the needs of the industry to actually have a chance to succeed against the illicit market. Thank you for your consideration.
Our next commenter is Sarah Armstrong. Your microphone is unmuted.
Speaking in my capacity as the policy chair for the Southern California Coalition, I would like to remind the honorable body that delivery services are subject to the same rules as anybody else. They must have a cage. Here in Los Angeles, they use mostly small cargo vans. In order to make bank, they're going to open up that cage every 20 minutes on a public street. It would seem much safer to let these services create their own safety precautions and their own solutions. As long as it rose to the level of a locked cage, it shouldn't be a problem, and it might be much more safer and much more discreet than a cage that's visible to anybody who walks by. It's unlikely that these solutions, even though they may not involve an independent locked cage, would fall below a certain level because, of course, all of these people carry insurance. Thank you for your time.
Our next public comment is from Wesley Hine. Your microphone is now unmuted.
Thank you. Wesley Hine, Mammoth Distribution. As you can tell by our name, we are in the business of distributing cannabis. We have several vehicles, each with the interior cages that are being discussed, so I'm pretty familiar with the requirement and its drawback. As a distributor, we have an economic incentive to protect our inventory, but cages and lockboxes don't really provide the protection you think they might, and they're costly, several $1,000s per vehicle. You should have seen the face of the social equity partner that we sponsor when I told him that what he has to now spend, now that he has his distribution license before he can transport his first gram. More important than the cost to license holders, however, I want to talk about the risks to the drivers themselves. Cages value the security of the inventory over that of the workers who have to open and close these cages every time with their backs exposed. This requirement invites strong armed robberies of inventory.
30 seconds.
If we take out the requirement for lockboxes, we still have the requirements for inventory being locked and secured while unattended, as well as cannabis goods not being visible. I agree we need a common sense perspective as we look at the cost and unintended risks of this requirement. Thank you.
Our next public comment comes from Lauren Frazier. Your microphone is unmuted.
Thank you. Lauren Frazier with the Cannabis Distribution Association. I want to clarify that whether it's a self-transport or a full service distributor, the regulation as it's currently written does not provide any added protection. It does provide a lot of added cost and burden to produce, but it doesn't produce any additional protection. Specifically, the language in section 5311 says, no portion of the enclosed box, container, or cage shall be comprised of any part of the body of the vehicle or trailer. And so if you think about it, the walls and the ceiling and the floor of the vehicle cannot be part of that box. So we have to create a redundant wall, floor, and ceiling to a box instead of just placing a gate within the interior of the vehicle. So it's very redundant and, again, creates no additional benefit to protection.
At this time, we have received no additional requests for comments. Would you like me to close this feature?
Yes, please, moderator.
This feature has been closed.
Very good. We've received some excellent public comment, and I don't know if that has stimulated any suggestions by other committee members on a new recommendation or comments they'd like to make before a recommendation is made.
Thank you, Chair. Are there any committee members that would like to make a comment? Committee Member Williams, I saw that your hand was raised and then you put it down. Are you not wishing to make a comment at this time?
Not this time.
Okay, thank you. So Committee Member Williams, I see that your hand is raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself to provide your comment.
Yes, I think the last comment provided by Ms. Frazier was pretty accurate. And I think if we can work on expanding on what she said about the fact that the vans, the cars, they already have walls, they have a ceiling, they have a floor. Really the only thing missing is a lock to prevent the outside from the inside. I think we can focus on that and being able to wordsmith that part of it. Yeah, doing away with the actual box within a box component of this would go a long way in addressing some of the concerns that are being brought up.
Thank you, Committee Member Babulian. Committee Member Wu, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to make your comment, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just want to echo Babulian's comments and say that, I'd be supportive of the motion with respect to, the requirements of having redundant or, simplifying that process. But I think the part that still gives myself pause is the, self-transport portion, only because it's something that could be potentially exploited. And I just, want to remind everyone that, when we talk about micro licenses, right, that there was a big discussion about how larger entities were exploiting that micro license or potentially could exploit that micro license. And so the only reason I brought that aspect up was to kind of really say, hey, we hear, all the small growers that complained about that. That was the only reason I kind of brought up this use of this license and being potentially, kind of a loophole for larger players. So that's all.
Thank you, Committee Member Wu. Are there any other committee members that wish to make additional comments? Chair Farrow, I do not see any other members raising their hands.
Well, absent a motion on this particular item, I think there's plenty of public comment that our regulators can use as they look at crafting draft regulations for the merged entity that will be in charge of licensing. Oh, I see some other hands. So I will open it back up to committee member comments.
So I see that Committee Member Babulian has his hand raised. Committee Member Babulian, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, Ms. Nevedal, I was wondering, what if the motion reads something like this? Parts of the vehicle can be utilized as part of the enclosed box, container, or cage, as long
I'm
as a lock of some sort.
Mr. Babulian, I can't hear you. I'm so sorry.
Sorry about that. I thought you were going to say it was too fast. No, what I was going to say is, Ms. Nevedal, what do you think about the motion reading something like this? Parts of the vehicle can be utilized as parts of the enclosed box, container, or cage, as long as a lock of some sort needs to be utilized to access the product.
Thank you, Committee Member Babulian. I'm going to allow Committee Member Nevedal to respond first, and then I will come back to Committee Member Williams. So Committee Member Nevedal, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. This is Committee Member Nevedal. I I have a lot of questions about whether or not having secondary locks is beneficial. So if you have a container locked inside of your vehicle and you have to enter the vehicle and unlock it and fiddle around, I don't know that that creates more safety if anything, that makes me nervous, as I think Mr. Hine mentioned, about being robbed while you're distracted unlocking a container with product inside of the vehicle. And this is really challenging if you are dealing with a reefer truck, right? Because you're moving fresh frozen materials, or right, you have a smaller vehicle. So I don't know that it would get to what I was trying to get to, but I definitely do not want to dissuade or discourage you from making a motion.
Thank you, Committee Member Neville. Committee Member Williams, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Helena Williams. When I look at the section 5311 in its entirety, it seems like we're just looking at one small portion, and they're all cross-pollinated to be illegal transportation. So in it, it also has definitions as to what transporting means and what types of vehicles are considered conveyances for transportation. In subsection D, it states transportation by means of aircraft, watercraft, drone, rail, human-powered vehicle, or unmanned vehicle is prohibited. Cannabis goods, subsection E, cannabis goods shall only be transported inside a vehicle or trailer and shall not be visible or identifiable from outside of the vehicle or trailer. When we look at the preceding section, and it talks about, it would be actually subsection A, transportation shall only be conducted by persons holding a distributor license under the Act or employees of these persons. All vehicles and trailers used for transportation shall be owned or leased in accordance with the vehicle code, which then brings you back to the vehicle code. All provisions apply to any vehicles used for transport on a highway, which is defined as a roadway, highway, freeway that is open for public use. And it also goes back to the definition of what a vehicle is.
Thank you, Committee Member Williams. Committee Member Neville, I see that your hand is raised. If you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and mute yourself.
Yeah, I really appreciate, this is Committee Member Neville. I very much so appreciate Committee Member Williams bringing the code up. I just want to acknowledge the fact that I, for some reason, am having some technical difficulties. So it looks like I'm connected, but then I'm not hearing huge segments of the conversation. So I'm going to just mute my computer and I'm going to call in from my phone. My apologies.
Thank you, Committee Member Neville. While Committee Member Neville is reconnecting, are there any other committee members that would like to make a additional comment? Committee Member Williams, I still see that your hand is raised. Are you wishing to make additional comments?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to put it down.
Thank you. Are there any other members wishing to make any comments? Chair, I do not see. I see. Committee Member Bouboulian has his hand raised. Go ahead, Committee Member Bouboulian.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to suggest a motion. A motion to adopt a motion reads where parts of the vehicle can be utilized as parts of the enclosed box, container, or cage, as long as a lock of some sort needs to be utilized to access the product, and this would include the gate of the truck or vehicle or trailer.
Committee Member Bouboulian, can I have you repeat that one more time slowly, just so we can make sure we have it?
Sure. Motion reads that parts of the vehicle can be utilized as parts of the enclosed box, container, or cage, as long as a lock of some sort needs to be utilized to access the box, container, or enclosed area, which would also include the gates of the trailer or truck or van.
This is Committee Member Cermak. I second the motion.
Thank you, Committee Member Cermak.
call roll. Let's make sure.
I'm sorry,
Excuse
is
me.
somebody speaking? This is a court reporter.
Yes, it is the co-moderator. I'm just going to read back the motion to Committee Member Baboulian to make sure that we have recorded it correctly. Committee Member Baboulian, your motion reads, recommend parts of the vehicle can be utilized as part of the enclosed box, container, or cage as long as a lock of some sort be utilized to access the box, container, or enclosed area, including the gates of the vehicle or trailer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Committee Member Cermak, is that the motion that you have seconded?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And I'd like to make sure before we call the vote that Ms. Dahl was able to reconnect using her phone.
This is the moderator. Can committee member Nevdal please unmute your microphone and say something? So this is the moderator. I do have 3 individuals in the attendee list that are identified as call-in users. I could individually unmute and identify who's on the line to see if one of those is committee member Nevdal. Would you like me to do this?
Please, moderator.
Attendee by the identification call-in user number 32. You are unmuted. Could you please identify yourself? Call-in user 32.
Or at least say you're not Kristen Nevedal. If you don't want to identify.
Call-in user 57. Lastly, call-in user 59. So based on the call-in user, I was unable to identify committee member Nevdal by one of those 3 call-in users. I will wait for further direction.
This is committee member Nevedal. Can you hear me?
We can. We can't.
Yes, we can. Committee member Nevedal, we could hear you. I see that you muted yourself.
Thank you. This is committee member Nevedal. I'll just try to make this work. When you go to the phone line and connect via phone, you can't see your number anymore in the communicate tab. So, and I responded each of those times, and so I don't think any of those was my line. So we'll just see how this goes. I have a connection right now.
Okay.
Thank you, committee member. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair. I was just going to say, committee member Neville, you still have your hand raised. I'm not sure if you were wanting to make a comment before we go to. Thank you. The hand has been dropped.
So Kayla, would you please call the roll on the motion?
Yes, I'll read the motion back one more time. So the motion is to recommend parts of the vehicle recommend that parts of the vehicle can be utilized as part of the enclosed box, container, or cage, as long as a lock of some sort be utilized to access the box, container, or enclosed area. This would include the gates of the vehicle or trailer. And with that, I'll move to the vote. Committee member Baboulian?
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Cermak? Moderator, committee member Cermak, what is your vote?
I voted yes, Cermak.
Committee member Clifford?
Aye.
Thank you. Committee member Farrow?
Yes.
Thank you. Committee member Heidelbach?
Abstain.
Thank you. Committee Member Harada.
Abstain.
Thank you. Committee Member Nevdal.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Peck.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Stevenson.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Williams.
Nay.
Thank you. Committee Member Wu.
Aye.
Thank you. Committee Member Yu.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Well, that concludes the work for the committee on today's agenda. I know that there's some question on whether we were going to consider any future agenda items. As you note by the agenda that was presented today, we had no agenda item that dealt with that. We took the public comment on future agenda items. Those will be rolled over for consideration at our next meeting, where we will have an agenda item for the end of the meeting for future agenda items. The next meeting will be a continuation of items dealing directly with the supply chain to try to fill in those portions of the supply chain that were not addressed today. So that way we can begin the process of preparing for the consolidation of the licensing agencies. So with that, I want to thank everybody for the participation today. This was very unique for our committee, and I appreciate all of you working with us to work through some of the bumps along with communications, but your input was valuable and your participation was valuable as well. So thank you very much. Have a great day.